Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction, Ed. So today I would like to talk to you about our agroecology journey so far, and that includes talking about some of the experiences that we've gone through, some of the successes that we've had, and also some of the failures that we've had. We farm in Newport, Shropshire, and alongside that, Ed's mentioned that we're the national, the agroecology site for Hutchinsons. And that's great because we do get to try lots of things, and it really pushes me on to try more things still, which is brilliant. To give a bit of background about the farm's primary enterprise has always been indoor pigs. And we've typically had sort of 550, 600 sows, selling sort of 15 to 17,000 pigs a year. And very recently, we took the decision to actually come out of the pig sector. I'm sure some of you in the room know that the pig sector has gone through huge levels of turmoil in the last few years. We've had horrible diseases in China causing some fairly nasty overproduction globally. We've had Brexit, we've had COVID, and just latterly, hugely high feed input prices, and now electric prices too. So for us, there was just too much uncertainty there, too much risk for us to carry on in that enterprise. And it really is the reason why, on the arable side of our business, agroecology and the ability to farm long-term with profit and sustainability at the foundation of what we're doing is so much more important to us now as a business than it ever was. We've gone from having multiple enterprises now to having a single enterprise. We're still doing pigs, so we have decided to stay in pigs, but we're doing a much more smaller niche outdoor free-range pig enterprise, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So on the arable side, the farm's typically been about 200 hectares of owned ground. Light sandy soils. We can irrigate most fields. And in the last few years, we've sort of moved away from having fixed rotations, and we'll perhaps touch on that in a little bit. But certainly, combinable crops really is what we do. And in terms of the kit that we have the normal kit, and we'll touch on some of that a little bit later. In terms of yields, sort of 10-year average yields, 9 tonnes of wheat, 8¼ tonnes of barley, 4¼ tonnes of rape. And one thing that has really changed in the last couple of years is, we've sort of started to do more contracting, and contracting really with an agroecology focus, which is great. So sort of this next year we'll be up to sort of 350 hectares of contracting, and hopefully that will continue to grow. So we started sort of down the regenerative route, sort of 2018, 2019. And alongside that, we don't really do much with any of the stewardship schemes other than SFI pilot, because we're doing most of those things already, so it kind of made sense to be part of that. So why agroecology? So the farm's got a history of some reasonably intensive cropping. For about 15 years, there was a 3-course rotation of spuds, sugar beet, and wheat. And alongside those, the sugar beet went in about 2007 when our local sugar beet factory closed down. And at that time, oilseed rape then came into the mix, and the rotation started to lengthen. But even after then, our cultivation practices were very, very intensive. So, we were still rotationally ploughing, we were combination drilling and power harrowing everything, we were subsoiling everything. And almost on our sandy soils, kind of the more we did, which is what Ian was alluding to earlier, the more we did, the more we had to do to keep those soils and try and artificially create that structure. And I suppose as time progressed, both my father Martin and myself started to just feel that we were taking a lot more from the land than we were actually giving back. We were harvesting, we were taking the grain, we were taking the straw, We were putting a little bit of slurry back on, but really it was take, and we weren't putting enough back. And there was no connection with the biology that is so important in the soils that we're trying to farm on. We were completely divorced from that, really. So in sort of 2018, 2019, the potatoes came out of the rotation. We still have to be able to grow potatoes as a nation, and they have a very, very strong place. But on our farm, with the sort of where we thought we'd got to with our soil health, we feel that we had to step away from that. So we stopped potatoes. We did some soil baseline tests, just kind of put a line in the sand of where we were, and that really allowed us then to go, well, how are we going to try and improve our soil health, our soil structure? What are we going to do about that? And really, at the very start, it was just the basics. We needed to really try and get those basics right, that we'll talk about in a second. Another feeling that I suppose that sort of inadvertently came is that we kind of felt that we were on a little bit of a treadmill. There was only a few years ago now, there was already front runners in this way of farming who were 5, 10, 15 years in front of where we wanted to be, and they were already starting to make those jumps to starting to pull back those inputs in terms of nitrogen, fungicides, insecticides. And at the time, I was very inspired by those people, and I still continue to be so today. But what I loved about it was just it was a lower risk model. We were getting off that treadmill, and actually that's really where I wanted to be. The next thing is asking why. So in order to really to critique what we were doing, we had to scrutinize every operation, every input. It really worked well because at the time we had an independent agronomist who was retiring. Ed came on board, and it was the challenge the challenge from him was exactly what we needed to make some of these bigger decisions and to be able to step back from some of the things that we were doing. So challenging why all the time, and really, was really helped us try and get to where we wanted to be. In terms of reducing risk, we've got plenty of experience in dealing with risks in the pigs. Within our old business, essentially the arable business was growing about 40% of the cereals that we needed to go into the pigs, and the pigs are really where we realised our profit as a business. But risk, we were taking huge risks with what we were doing, and especially when we were growing a product that took so long to produce. Farmers typically, and this is only probably on reflection in the last couple of years, but we are very good at taking risk. We all handle huge amounts of risks in our day-to-day business, really. When you sort of drill down into, when you're buying inputs off people, whether it be seed, fert, spray, machinery, equipment, fuel, all of those people are tending to realise their income at the point of sale. We're the ones that typically take those inputs, put them in the ground, 10 months goes by, we then go through all the different challenges with the weather, we produce a crop, and there's a huge amount of risk there. And even when it's in the shed, we then have the risk of then selling it in a very volatile market. So changing the focus for us personally, moving from out and out yield, which is kind of what we used to focus on, to out and out profit was a big step. And then really, as time's progressed, and this is where I hope in the future we can continue to go, is look for different and better markets and premiumize some of the things we do, and certainly that's what we're hoping to do with the pigs a little bit. But producing a better pig, and a pig that is got the best meat-eating quality, because that's what we're trying to aspire to do, requires the best food, and we're hoping that those two things will dovetail quite nicely together. So these are some of the activities and things that we're kind of engaging with on the agroecology side at the moment. And I sort of thought I'd just throw them all up there because when we first went down this route, it is incredibly daunting about how broad a topic and an area it is, and there's just so much to know, so much to learn. You tend to kind of find that when you speak to people that have gone down the road, they bury themselves in books, they sort of almost get this thirst for learning more, and it sort of really reinvigorates, really invigorates them, which, I can say that we have the similar really. In terms of some of the bigger topics here, direct drilling for us was one of the decisions we had to just get on and do. You know, we were combination drilling with a power harrow, everything, and it didn't allow us to start and build natural structure when we were working the ground so hard. So we did what everyone said not to do, which was to go and buy a shiny drill. We did that. It's very easy to do that, but we kind of had to be able to step away from the model that we were on and go down the direct drilling route. So that really led us to trying to pull back on our cultivations. As I say, we're farming on some very light sand. The soil likes to go quite tight. So we had to do that in a very gradual manner. And I suppose, you know, I've already come across it a little bit. You know, you see people rush into this and they don't give it the time that it needs and the time that the soil has to change and adapt, really. So stepping back from cultivations was really, really important. I'm still struggling to step back from cultivations altogether, especially with oilseed rape. You know, I aspire to get there, but I'm still struggling with that. A huge cornerstone of the agroecology side for me is cover crops and catch crops. It is, something feels about it, it feels so right, trying to keep the ground covered as much as we can, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. Companion cropping is something that we've done in the last couple of years. So in terms of buckwheat and clover in with our oilseed rape, and that's not really from a flea beetle perspective. That's just to try and get more diversity into the crop. You know, oilseed rape doesn't associate with mycorrhizal fungi anyway, so if there's anything that we can do to try and keep that going through that next crop, we're keen to do that. So when we started down the direct drilling route, we started with a 750, which is a great drill, and we've changed this year to an Avatar, and that's really only off the back of a grant which was able to allow us to do that. And that's really opened up the next kind of segment of this area, which is kind of starting to work with more biological extracts. We did a bit of work a couple of years ago in terms of building some bioreactors and producing fungally dominant composts. And this year has really been the first year that we've gone, right, well, let's now get that down in with the seed, or drench it and get it on the seed and put that down in the drilling too. So we're also sort of trying to work a little bit with worms and vermicompost, and again, those things all come together. Blends is something that Ed's group of farmers are all very keen on. So we started that sort of 2 or 3 years ago, sort of 4-way wheat blends. It's really... probably the biggest thing for us is that it's probably allowing us that flexibility to try and step away from fungicides more and try and have some genetic diversity in amongst the crop. And then bicropping is the last thing I'll just touch on out of this list. You know, we've grown peas and spring beans and spring oats now for a couple of years, and that's something that I think has got huge potential because we've definitely got a synergy of the two growing together. We're getting more yield as a result, and the soil seems to be really, really enjoying having multiple species growing at the same time as well. So what's great about agroecology from my perspective is that I love the interesting side of it. It really does engage me, and you know, Ian talked about it earlier. You know, it's not just me, it's the staff that work on the farm as well, and they've got to come along with this journey. And I'm always sharing with them what we're doing and how we're going about things, because it's really keen that they go on the journey with us too. In terms of collaboration, it's a fantastic community that, you know, if you've got problems, you know, everyone's always willing to help. It's fantastic that actually if you get stuck with something, you know, you can pick up the phone, you can speak to someone else, they'll help you. And you don't want to make mistakes that people have already made. It's, you know, it's if you can help it, and that sort of level of collaboration really, really helps in that respect. In terms of cost reduction, at the moment we're going through a period of time where input prices are just skyrocketing, and we have to try and work hard to reduce cost. And I feel that this way of farming has got the most potential to try and pull back our costs, because, well, certainly on our farm, we're not seeing yields going up year on year on year. So what can we try and do is try and grow that crop for less money. So, you know, Ian touched on it earlier. You know, we've got huge swathes of P and K in the ground from years of putting slurries and manures on the ground, but actually they're all locked up. So for us, instead of going and buying that product, we need to try and unlock the P and the K with the biology that's in the soil to try and do that. In terms of flexibility, we are farming in an extremely climatically volatile place. Every single year that I farm, it's the coldest, the warmest, the wettest, the driest time on record. And actually we have to farm in amongst all of that. And certainly with some of the regenerative principles, whether that's not putting seed dressings on and using home-saved seed more, if we have to change and go down a different route or a different direction, well, it just gets sold and we change and we go down in another direction. So it's very flexible. And certainly when we are drilling into cover crops, which we've done a lot of this time, we can travel better as well as a result of the fact that we're actually travelling on some living routes, which really, really helps. In terms of a period of change in farming, we've talked about the climate. Climate change is definitely happening. We're losing BPS. And we've also got new emerging markets like carbon and biodiversity that are yet to sort of show their hand in terms of how that's actually going to benefit farmers and how farmers can engage with those. But we are going through a time of huge change. And a little bit like what I was saying about cost, I definitely feel that the agroecology has definitely got the most potential to try and align with some of those changes that are coming our way. And probably something that does weigh on my mind from time to time, not a lot, but I certainly, when it comes to the next generation, my two kids, if they want to farm, I'd love them to farm and I'd love to be able to hand the farm over to them in as good a nick as I possibly can. So, I've made that investment in the farm so that they can take it forward if they wish to do so, which for me is really, really important. So what's not great about it? It definitely takes more management time on a day-to-day basis. It's, I suppose, because, I should put that list on of all those different things that we're doing at the moment. And I think what's the next thing for us really is trying to narrow down what brings the biggest benefit for our farm, really. And that's, because we haven't got all the time in the world. These two photos at the top here are me filling the drill at 2 o'clock in the morning because, doing extractions and coming back to the yard and doing very small things that happen at the time of the year where you're already flat out anyway. So, that's what I put there about time-heavy ops. Perhaps we've got to look at how we do some of those more time-intensive things and actually try and upscale them as we get bigger if we do more contracting and try and bring those things in line, really. In terms of seed genetics and seed breeding, one thing that I'm very conscious of is that when we look at the HGCA recommended list and we're picking our varieties for the next season, all of the varieties in there tend to be based on breeding that's based on high nitrogen inputs, high fungicide, high spray inputs. And actually, is that really what we want for agroecology? So maybe more research needs to happen so that some of the varieties that we're working with are more aligned to the type of farming that we're doing, really. And then just in terms of consistency of results, where we've got that's my vermicompost bin, and these are some of the Johnson Sioux bioreactors that we've got on the farm. We're working with biology on a daily basis, and one thing that I'm very aware of is that can vary hugely. And if we're trying to build and deliver consistency year on year, how do we do those processes more consistently? So that's something that we've very much got to spend more time on, really. Part of the Helix job is that we do lots of trials. I haven't really got enough time to go through all of them today, but some of the big ones or some of the important ones from my side of the fence really is trying to reduce our glyphosate input. In this particular way of farming does use quite a lot of glyphosate, and there may be a time in the future where we have to use less or we have to not use any. So we thought a couple of years ago, well, let's try and farm without some. So that's what we're doing with glyphosate. Nitrogen, it's great to see, it's not great that nitrogen prices have gone up, but it's great to see so many farmers trying to trial different ways and reducing their level of nitrogen back to work out what is their sort of optimum on their farms. And we're doing the same thing, really. And I think we will continue to do that going forward, because that will give us the yardstick to be able to, if we do pull back, when we start to pull back nitrogen more and more in the future, that will give us the yardstick of whether we're doing the right thing at the right time. We've talked about variety blends. We'll definitely continue with those. And certainly on the biological side, as we're starting to apply more biology to our soil, we want to sort of go and have a look at that over a bigger time scale. So successes. I've often heard it said that it requires, this type of farming, agroecology, requires a different mindset. And I feel that we have gone through that process and that transition now of acquiring a different mindset in terms of how the farm runs and how the farm looks. You know, there certainly is, direct drilling looks different to a wonderful field that's turned brown. And quite rightly, so many farmers are very proud of how their farms look in the autumn. And you know, it is something that does take a bit of time to adjust, and it's one of those things that you sometimes just have to have faith in what you're doing. Direct drilling for us, it works. You know, we've kind of gradually phased these things in, and we find now that we've got obviously our drill's a disc drill. We find it's very versatile. In those first few early years, we definitely experienced the same things that other people see in terms of the fact that the slot was harder to close, but things start to be aligning now, and things start to get much better. In terms of a living lab concept, we've all got farms with tram lines, and some people have yield mapping on their combines and stuff, which it's great actually just to get on and try different things on different farms, on different parts of the field, just so that you've got a bit of a comparison against two different ways of doing things. One of the great things is that at this time of year, when we kind of make or earlier in the autumn, when we go around and we make a strategy for what we're doing this autumn, we can definitely see that the soil structure is starting to change, and that's a very rewarding process, going around with a shovel and actually seeing the change starting to happen. Cover crops, I think, are a really, really big part of that. And they're really not, I thought it would be, when we first started down this road, I thought cover crops would be easy to grow and everything else. They're not, we haven't found them the easiest things in the world to grow. The timing of establishment and just getting on as soon as the combine's out the field is vital. And getting them to fit in the right part of the rotation or following the right crops is also, we found, is also really, really important. But going on from that, proving that they have a nutritional benefit, they're not just an out-and-out cost, and what benefits they have in the following crop is something that, until you do it on your farm, and you don't really realise. And the ability to actually bring sheep and get them grazed off brings a different set of biology onto the farm, and actually the sheep keep pays for the seed anyway, so it really is a win-win. And in terms of the last thing that's a success for us is that our contracting business has grown, which has kind of really helped in a time where we've come out of, we've stepped away from our previously sort of main enterprise. When we started down the route of direct drilling, and certainly in those first years, sort of 19, 20, they were pretty miserable autumns. I don't think many people will forget. But certainly one thing that did really, really help is that we learned a huge amount by trying to drill and trying to establish in really, really poor conditions. So that's really, really helped. And it's great to help other farmers and other growers who are sort of going down this route and perhaps don't want to make the investment of buying a new drill and just want to try things. So it's great to help others. And doing it with an agroecology focus and that different skill set does really give us a USP against other conventional contractors, which is brilliant. So in terms of failures, patience is probably at the top of my list. Direct drilling, when we first bought a direct drill, I went on an operator's course, which I found really, really useful. And they said there that, you probably want to be drilling a couple of weeks earlier in the autumn, a couple of weeks later in the spring, because you have to sit and wait and be patient for that soil to come right. Rather than going and artificially creating a seed bed with cultivation, you've just got to be patient. And that's really easy to say, but very, very hard to do when all of your neighbours all the way around you are bombing around the place and getting on with the job, and you're there going, nope, I'm going to wait, and I need to wait because the soil isn't ready yet. If I do go in now, it's too soon. So that's been hard, and I still need a stern talking to from Ed every now and again to say, no, stop, you need to leave it a bit. So And I put this slide up here from a recreational tillage. You touched on recreational tillage earlier. This is my photo. This is my somber reminder of what happens when you do recreational tillage on our farm. It's light sand. This was early potatoes, lifted, beautifully harvested with a self-propelled. For whatever reason, we thought it was the right thing in those early days to go in and subsoil and to put a time cultivator through that ground. And little did we know, middle of August, 130, 150 mil of rain in about 3 hours, and about 2,000 or 3,000 tons of soil ran down that hill and ended up at the bottom of the valley there. So got a bulldozer in, pushed it all back up and carried on, but at huge cost. But that photo is almost my turning point, because we jumped in there. We were far too brash with what we were trying to do. The soil didn't need it. We could have gone down a different avenue, but that is my reminder of why we don't do recreational tillage anymore. We only do what we absolutely have to do: dig holes, look at the structure. If we need to subsoil a headland because it's gone flat, do so, but look at things in more detail. Ryegrass is definitely our biggest nemesis on the farm. It's not. I need to point out that it's not a failure of the system. It's probably a failure of me not taking it seriously enough and not managing the weed well enough, because it has spread to lots of fields across the farm. It's definitely going to require us to shift our approach. We spent, 3 years going, well, that chemical didn't work because it's herbicide, because it's resistant to quite a few herbicides. That chemical didn't work, so let's try another one next year. And then the years roll on and the years roll on, and hey presto, you do end up spreading it about. So the shift from chemical control to cultural control is really important. And the biggest thing that I wanted to say about our problem with ryegrass is that all the agroecology stuff, although it's really, really important, it doesn't get in the way of us making the right decision from the economical perspective for that field, for that crop. And we do have to plough. We try and plough as well as we can in terms of not deep, shallow, and we try and do it with the right thinking behind it. But it's not a religion, agroecology, it's a guide. And I do feel that the zero tillage and the direct drilling side of agroecology actually is the right way. We're not trying to spread those seeds all the way through the soil profile. We're trying to keep them on the top, and we're trying to know what we're dealing with and where that seed is. So I do feel it's really right for that. Clover understories, for me, is a bit, I love the concept of getting clover growing as an understory with wheat or another different crops. And I'm very much striving to get there. Tried for a couple of years now, and for whatever reason we haven't been able to do that. And I don't know whether that's almost a throwback of, a reasonably input-heavy previous history. Is it a sensitive crop? Or how we're going about establishing it? But we want to get there, because we do think a living mulch and some sort of living crop would be great. We haven't just got there yet. And the last thing here is time, which Ian touched on earlier. But hopefully I'm not stepping on Ben's toes, but I sat at one of Ben's presentations a few years ago, and he actually put up that regenerative farming or agroecology is a little bit like a huge game of snakes and ladders. There is definite potential to make big gains quickly, but there's great potential to make and take steps backward if you're not careful. And with arable farming, we only get one crack at it a year. There's one chance typically to get things right, to make that right decision. So it inevitably takes a huge amount of time. And I'm not expecting to see the full benefits, although we're starting to see the steps in the right direction. I think for us it is going to take time. So if you've got an idea or you want to try something, you've really just got to go for it, get on with it, really. So from our side of the fence, really, we're at the start of a journey. We've talked about that we think it's going to take, a good few years to fully go through that journey. And we've still got loads to learn, and that's where speaking to others and trying to fast track in terms of making those mistakes really helps speaking to other people. In terms of biological extracts, one thing that we're very conscious of is that we don't want to step away, if we don't want to replace lots of inputs in terms of nitrogen and fungicides and insecticides with just bought in products of different biology in a can or in a jug. So for us, homemade biology on farm is what we want to be investing our time in going forward to see if we can perfect that and make that better. The free-range pigs is a really, really interesting one, and what I'm hoping to do, considering we're doing it pretty much on the opposite side of the country to everyone else who does free-range pigs, is we want to really try and tie that in so that we can try and graze off some covers, we can try and bring them into the weed management plan in terms of the ryegrass, and just see how well and see how they can fit in and dovetail into the arable business. In terms of cost control, honestly, I'm losing count. Every single invoice that lands on the desk at the moment, it's always a lot more than I was expecting it to be. And I think for us, over this next season in particular, keeping a razor-sharp eye on cost is absolutely paramount. And especially as we, go down, we start and do more contracting, what I'm very conscious of is that we don't lose sight of and become complacent, because all these little things that we're doing at the moment is having an effect. And as I said earlier, it's just trying to gauge which ones are providing the biggest benefit. So beyond this next season, ryegrass is ultimately going to be the war that we're looking to try and win. We need to move away from chemistry that simply doesn't work for us anymore in lots of respects and start and look down the cultural route. The ryegrass and agroecology need to come together and be at the centre of all of those decisions in terms of in the day-to-day decisions that we make. We never want to lose sight of asking why we're doing these things. We need to keep challenging ourselves. Ed needs to keep challenging me. My team, we need to continually challenge each other. But hopefully, because we've already started to do it, we can start and pull back on our inputs, and we can start and pull back on our cost. And one thing that I didn't say earlier is that after a couple of years of going down this route in terms of costs, what I thought one day, one wet winter day, is I thought I would take 2 years worth of agroecology-based costs, and I standardised all the input prices for fertiliser, seed, spray. I standardised all of the output prices in terms of what we'd sold the grain for. And then I compared it back to a previous time of conventional farming. And what was great is that they were the same, because those were the first years. We were going through some pretty miserable autumns as well, and our yields had been a little bit lower. But my take-home message and the fact that the success that I did through that process was that actually we're still on a parity, and we've still got huge potential to pull back costs going forward. I love what we've done with the bicropping and the polycropping. There's something that really feels right about that. The fact that we've got pigs on farm means that if we have beans and we've got oats, we can just mill them and put them into pig feed, although in our first year of growing them, we did decide to split them out. But something that is definitely an area that I want to explore going forward. And I suppose to kind of tie up, we need to kind of understand continually reevaluate what our managerial the impacts are on the soil health. We definitely are moving in the right direction now. We definitely reaffirmed and reconnected with the biology and the bigger picture of how we're trying to farm. And all of that really just means that we've got to be working with nature all the time and not working against it, because that's ultimately really where we might have been going wrong in the past. So.